The 2020 census is less than a year away. The Trump administration wants to add a controversial new question. What has the court said? And how would this affect Americans? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Here's a riddle for you. It's controversial. It comes every 10 years. The public loves and hates it at the same time, and people are making a huge deal about it. What could it be? A 90s movie reboot. Well, those can be controversial, like the new live-action Lion King movie. But I'm actually talking about the US Census. A census is an official count of a population, and the Constitution tells us that one of the federal government's duties is keeping track of the number of people in the United States. The US government counts the entire population every 10 years. It used to be done by one guy in a big room, but he kept losing count and having to start all over again. But today, that task is currently done by the US Census Bureau. The Bureau also gathers important data about the American public and the economy through additional surveys, things like labor statistics and whether you own or rent a home. In the Constitution, the census is referred to as an actual enumeration of the population. Every single household in the nation is required to answer it, upon penalty of a $100 fine. And you've probably heard about the census in the news lately. There's a perfectly good reason for that. It's right around the corner. Less than 9 months away, to be exact. No, that's not a joke. It's actually done on April 1st. So if you happen to get pregnant right now, your baby may be born just in time to be counted. You can even name it Census. Now that's patriotic. Also, your baby will be an Aries, so good luck with that. But the real reason we're talking about the census is because a federal judge just banned this question from appearing on it. Are you a citizen of the United States? President Trump and his administration, especially Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, have been fighting to get that question on next year's census. Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court had blocked the question from being added to the census. After that court's ruling, Trump quietly backed down from it. Just kidding. He threatened to put the question onto the census by executive order. He did ultimately step away from that, though. Why did the Supreme Court nix the citizenship question? In the court's opinion, the administration did not provide good enough justification for it. Despite the court's rulings and a sizable amount of backlash and criticism, Trump stands by the controversial question.
Knowing this information is vital to formulating sound public policy, whether the issue is health care, education, civil rights, or immigration. We must have a reliable count of how many citizens, non-citizens, and illegal aliens are in our country.
Trump's fight to get the citizenship question on the census is not new. In fact, government emails reveal that his administration started discussing the need to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census as early as May 2017. But before we go any further, it's worth pointing out that this would not be the first time the U.S. Census would feature a citizenship question, although it would technically be the first time that a single question about citizenship is asked in this specific way. Historically, a question about citizenship has been asked by the U.S. Census Bureau in one form or another in most censuses since 1820, and in every census since 1900. And I mean literally in one form or another. Of course, the census was simpler back in the good old days. In 1900, there were only 28 questions. By 2010, there were 10 questions. That's because at some point mid-century, the US government finally realized that people hate filling out forms, and that the more they had to fill out, the less likely they were to do it at all. So, as society got more complex and statistical sampling got better, the US Census Bureau started collecting data differently. In fact, the census questions changed every single time it was issued. By 1940, the Census Bureau had split the census into a main census that everyone had to answer and a supplemental census that asked more questions to a smaller population, around 25% of the people depending on the year. There was a citizenship question in the main census through 1950. Here it is. Well, it's actually two questions. One asks where the person is born. The second asks if the person was foreign-born, is he naturalized? But starting in 1960, the citizenship question, along with a ton of other questions, was put into the supplemental census. Not because it wasn't important, it's that the Bureau wanted to simplify the main census so that more people would actually fill it out. The 1960 census was also the first one that was mailed out to households instead of filled out by a government employee going door to door. That all changed again in 2005. 2005 wasn't a census year, but that's when the Census Bureau decided that collecting data once a decade just wasn't frequent enough. So, they got rid of the supplemental questions altogether, and instead created the American Community Survey to be asked every year, this time of around 3% of people on a rotating basis. That's where the citizenship question is now. That survey is just a supplement to the official census once a decade, which is required by the Constitution to count everybody. In 2010, the census only had 10 questions. In 2020, it'll probably be 11. And "Are you a citizen?" won't be on it. But as I said, it will be on the American Community Survey. So the government will still have an estimate of what percentage of the population is a citizen, just not an exact count. So, at the center of this current debate is, why does Trump want to put the citizenship question back in the main census? Well, like most things, the answer to that depends on who you ask. If you ask some liberals, they'll tell you it's because Trump is a racist, and he wants to use the census results to scare immigrants and minorities. If you ask some conservatives, they might tell you it's because Trump wants the US government to collect more accurate citizenship data. Well, census data does not, and actually cannot, be used to track down individuals and deport them. Because the way the citizenship question is structured, it only asks if you're a citizen or non-citizen, not whether you're here legally or not. Now, would putting a citizenship question in the census mean we truly get a more accurate count of how many US citizens there are? That question is harder to answer. An internal Census Bureau analysis predicts that if the citizenship question were added back in, responses from non-citizens would go down around 6%. Mainly because some non-citizens would be too scared to fill out the census in the first place, even if they are in the US legally. And that means non-citizens could be undercounted in the census, and that could have a big impact on states with a lot of immigrants. The census and other surveys help federal, state, and local governments make important decisions that affect the public. They're important tools used to decide private and public matters. For example, how will billions of dollars worth of federal money be spent? When and where will a new school be built? How about that new hospital? How are each community's needs met? Immigrants who are in the US legally are entitled to pretty much all the same services as citizens, which is why those immigrants are also supposed to fill out the census. But the number of people filling out the census matters in another really important way. The number of congressional representatives each state gets is based on the number of people living in that state as counted by the census. That's why California has 53 representatives and Iowa has only 4, even though Iowa has much better state fairs, something liberals and conservatives can all pretend they agree on. Today, there are 435 US congressional representatives. How many of them are from each state often gets adjusted after each census is conducted. As one federal judge wrote in January, if the citizenship question were asked, several states would lose at least one congressional seat based on 2020 census data. Texas, Arizona, Florida, New York, and Illinois face a substantial risk of a seat loss. Changes in population also affect the Electoral College, where representatives voting for president are also chosen based largely on population. Not that the citizenship question would hurt only liberals. Among those 5 states the judge mentioned, 2 are traditional red states, Florida is a swing state, and the other 2 are blue states. Although Democrats in red states and swing states that lose seats are more likely to be hurt by redistricting, which is a topic for another episode. But the key here is that change is scary, and we should avoid it whenever possible. It's also worth noting that the Supreme Court didn't really shut down the citizenship question altogether. They just said the reasons the Trump administration gave for adding it were not good enough. And now, there's not enough time between now and the 2020 census to pursue it further. So, get ready to go through this again for 2030. So, what do you think about the 2020 census and the citizenship question? Leave your comments below. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.